welcome to A Pot of the Seven Kingdoms, where you can join us on a read along of the Duncan Egg novellas. I'm Phil, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Hi everyone, I'm Caroline, also known as Belak on the internet, and we are just beginning our read along of A Knight of the Seven Kingdoms with this here book. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can see it. And we're reading the first section, which is from the very beginning of the book to about page 14, down just below one of the pictures. Hold on, page 14. Up to where my book has like the first 3 stars that kind of separates it, but it's up to the line. Yet as he headed down the road, he could feel the stable boy watching his back, sullen and silent. Ooh, the stable boy.
Yes.
Who could that be? I
Who
wonder.
could it be?
Just some kid, I'm sure. No one important to the future of Westeros. Anyway.
Well,
So,
in our first little intro episode, we talked about who we are and what we're doing here. But for those who want to skip ahead, we're doing a reading of a close reading of the 3 Duncan Egg novellas, and so we're starting, like you said, we're starting with this first little section. So, in looking at what actually happens here, we're introduced. Stuff definitely
stuff
happens.
happens.
We're introduced to Dunk right off the bat, and I know we've been joking about what a cozy and sort of whimsical story this is. So obviously, it opens on our main character, the hero, Dunk, digging a grave.
As you do, you bury bodies, right? When you're the opening scene to a cozy, nice story about just a lovely little hedge knight, you start with burying a body. So yes, we open to Dunk burying the body of his mentor, Arlan of Pennytree, I think is his name.
Yep.
And we learn while he's burying him that he was the knight. Dunk was his squire, and it seems like Arlan he was older. He was older in this universe, at least. He was in his 50s or early 60s, and seems to have just kind of gotten sick and died very suddenly. Which is a thing that happens in medieval times. You don't have modern medicine. Go get your vaccines. I'm sorry. Let's slip down on a little liberal propaganda for you there.
This is gonna get demonetized.
Shit. I mean,
Dunk burying the knight he squired for, and Dunk also, we get introduced to Dunk. So Dunk younger, he says he's like 16 or 17, and I know that most people will know him as, Duncan the Tall, if you've heard of other things, without getting too far ahead of ourselves. But he is very tall. They say closer to 7 feet than 6. So this is a very tall man.
This is a tall boy. We call this one a tall boy. Big boy Dunk. Duncan the big boy. And so he's large.
We open on him though, like in digging this grave, we find out it's the springtime, and him and his knight that he was squiring for were headed to a tournament at Ashford Meadow, which is in the Reach. So if you're trying to get your bearings in the in Westeros and on the map, so in the Reach, it's a spring, it's rainy, it's sort of got that Englandy vibe, but it was in this moment that basically he kind of goes back and forth for a little bit, Dunk, on what exactly he's gonna do, and he decides to continue on to the tournament after he kind of bounces around a little bit. He says like, maybe I'll like join the city. I could go to Lannisport, or I could go to like King's Landing and join the City Watch, and or I could, find if there's another hedge knight that needs a squire.
So I thought that was an interesting point, because that's his first thought. He's like, well, I was a squire for a hedge knight, so like I could go like basically get the same job. I have the qualifications. I'll submit my resume. It's fine. But then later on, we'll get to, he does not refer to himself as a squire.
No, he does not. He does not. At some point during his journey, so he decides to hit the road with his horses and what remains of Arlan's stuff.
stuff. Yeah, which is like not a lot. I mean, they're traveling. They're almost nomadic, so they don't have a lot of things. But it's all of his armor and his sword.
Yeah.
Um, his sword has a polished black stone pommel,
Mhm.
and I know this is not related to the various Blackstone theories within the A Song of Ice and Fire universe, but I did highlight it in my book because I was like, ah, Blackstone.
Yeah. How oily is this black stone, or is it fused? Yeah.
Good point. Good
Yeah.
point.
Dunk as a deep one theory. I think and it I think one of the things that entertained me about this little passage too was just the realistic approach of a lot of us who dabble in these fantasy worlds, have played D&D, where when you pick up
Mhm,
a suit of armor, it fits your character magically regardless of who
mhm,
you picked it up from. Not the case where Dunk, this nearly 7 foot tall behemoth, and
mhm.
his knight he was squiring for, who he says weighed less than like a bag of feathers when he
Yes.
buried it. He obviously the armor doesn't fit, so he only
Mhm.
gets like a couple of pieces that actually fit, and the sword belt doesn't even fit, where he has to just take a length of rope and make himself a sword belt. uh
Yeah, and it's shown in the picture on page 8. There's a picture of him with the horse, and you can see the rope, the hempen belt
yeah.
that he uses to tie the sword on, which is just adorable and like just so great. I love that. Yeah.
So he takes off with the horses,
Mhm,
and the stuff, and he makes his way towards Ashford Meadow, and he stops at an inn, because he does have one of the things he does have going for him is that relative to people around him, he's got some coin in his pocket.
mhm,
Um, but when he arrives at the inn, he has one of the most insane assumptions I think that anyone has ever made, which is
mhm,
Dunk shows up to the inn, and a naked child emerges, and
mhm.
he says, "Are you the stable boy?" And rather than allowing this kid to answer, just then proceeds to act as if, yes, it is the stable boy, and there couldn't be anything else going on here. This bald naked child is obviously the stable boy.
Why else do you keep a bald naked child near a stable other than to have them be the stable boy? I don't know. What's the problem? I don't get it. Like, seems legit to me.
I really and this is where Dunk does introduce himself as a knight. He
As a
tells this
knight.
kid that, "No, I'm a knight.
Mhm,
I'm a knight, I'll have you know," he says. And what was very funny about all this is he just starts giving orders to this child with
mhm,
the only stuff he owns in the
mhm.
world. He's like ready, he's so ready to just like hit the inn and get some food and some drink that he's like, like these are all
Yeah.
of my worldly possessions. This child will take care of them for me.
Yeah, and because he says, you'll get a copper if you do well and a clout in the ear if you don't. So
Yeah.
he encounters a small, naked, bald 8-year-old, uh, and says, "Take care of my horses, and I'll give you like a penny, or I'll hit you in the head. I'm going
Yeah.
inside to drink." That is a very 16-year-old kind of thing to say and assume, though. That's like very
That's
fits
right.
with like a teenager, like that
Yeah.
makes sense at that age.
Yeah. Hey,
Like,
hey, loser. Like,
get it, loser. We're going to the inn.
yeah, exactly. I so Dunk gets into he does hand off his horses and all of his belongings to the stable boy, and then heads inside.
I did have a
Um
question about the inn. Is this a
yes.
particular inn? Do we know where
It
this inn
doesn't
is?
it
It
doesn't
doesn't
seem like
say.
it doesn't seem like it's a particular inn. It's just one on the road
Just
to
on the way to
Ashford.
Ashford. Okay, I didn't know if it was like I'm not the best with the Westeros geography. I usually actually need the map up to figure things out, but it wouldn't be the inn at the crossroads. That's much further north.
Yeah, no,
So this is
and
just
that's
some
like
other inn.
Riverlands. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
this is just somewhere in the reach. And it's funny
Mhm,
because the innkeeper at one point does say half the town's gone to see the tourney, but she never says the name of the town.
mhm.
Like it's
Yeah.
just half the
George
town.
George didn't want to come up with a name that day.
Yeah.
He was like, "It's fine. It's somewhere. Don't worry about
He
it."
just kind of glosses over.
Yeah, yeah.
Um so we get Dunk in the inn, which it's very funny because he says, like, he doesn't say how much money he exactly has. He just says he has enough money to get some food and
Mhm.
all of the ale he can drink. So
Mhm.
it's quite clear that he has some significant coin, which, I mean, a silver stag, I think, is gets you quite far, like, in
Yeah.
in this day and age. um the inflation of 2.99 has not hit.
It was all those tariffs in 299. That was the
Yeah.
problem.
So but he goes in, and I thought it was so funny that the innkeep says, there's when he's like, is it ale you want or food? He says both, which totally fine. And then she says,
Mhm.
okay, like, food, what? There's good lamb roasted with herbs, roasted with a crust of herbs, and some ducks my son shot down. Which will you have? Both. Dunk
Yeah.
says, which to me is like a wildly decadent meal to order. Like, even now,
Yeah.
like, who's eating lamb and duck in
Lamb
one
and
sitting?
duck, and I don't know if that's just like a United States thing where it's like those are not like they're
Yeah,
not uncommon meats, but they're like not the most common. It's not like surf and turf, where you get like lobster and chicken. Like
yeah,
you could get that. Even that's kind of fancy,
right.
like to have both.
Yeah.
Like good for him though, to be able to eat all that.
There's a very short run TV show called Happy Endings that ran on
Mhm.
ABC that is one of my favorite TV shows of all time. It ran for 3 seasons. It is
Mm.
very good. But at one point, there was uh this couple is in a couples improv class and are yes anding each other, and they're like, what do you
Mhm.
want for dinner? They're like, well, I want chicken. Yes, and pork. Yes, and steak. And another person is like, you can't have chicken, pork, and steak in the same meal. You're not the king of England. um and that's what I felt like with Dunk. He's like, he walks into an inn with a coin and is like, I'm basically the king, and I'm
I
going
mean,
to.
is that not what a 16-year-old would do if you gave them like $100?
True.
Like
Drink
go buy
four
some
beer
beer, right?
drink 4 beers and
And get all the McDonald's you want, like that's like exactly like what a kid would do. Like he like drove his car to like the closest like beer spot,
yep,
got a little tipsy and ate a lot. Like, yeah, that is on George R. R. Martin did this as a teenager. This is
yes.
an autobiographical story about George R. R. Martin.
What I love about this section too, um, in both Dunk's conversation with the innkeep and then when he heads back out to the stables, is that there's this very, I say Arrested Development style conversation of two people talking about two different things, but thinking that they're talking about the same thing and
Mhm,
miscommunicating, in that the
mhm,
innkeep asks about the stable boy, and I thought it was hilarious that Dunk's like, "Yeah, oh, he's out there," or whatever.
mhm.
But the person that he's seen is not the innkeep's son who's the stable boy, right?
Right.
Like, it is a different child that he's referring to. And I just
Mhm.
found that to be so funny, like, reading through, as he's like, "Oh no, he's out there." Like, he
Yeah,
thinks
he's
he's being
got it.
so helpful, and he's describing a different child that has no connection to the innkeep whatsoever.
Mhm.
Um
Absolutely.
and so then we also get and we'll get to the analysis later, but we get the innkeep's take on tourneys. She's not a big sports person.
Yeah,
uh
yeah. We found out the innkeep did in fact vote for Donald Trump because she complains she complains about tourneys and how everybody left and nobody's there right now. And she says like she doesn't understand the point of tourneys. She says knights are built the same as other men, and I never knew a joust to change the price of eggs. Oh, well, okay, well, pans to outside. She has like a MAGA sign on her lawn.
yeah.
Come in.
I
I love that. Like, what? How did George R. R. Martin know to put that in there?
I know, I double checked the publication date too, and this was first published in 1998. So,
Wow,
like, quite the
damn
quite the
George.
for the foresight.
He's done that to me several times. Where like I'll be reading, uh, as a brief example, in rereading Fire and Blood, I developed a theory that I'm very adamant about, which is that dragons are not magic; they're just like special horses, basically.
Yeah.
And I've been saying that on my podcast with Gretchen, House of Fire and Blood, for like months. And then we've got to a section in like the middle of the book where it like says verbatim, it's like, but dragons are not horses.
That
And I'm like, fuck you, George. Fuck you. How did you know I'd be saying that now?
that no joke was the episode. That was one of the episodes I
Is
was
that when you
on
were on? Yeah.
yeah, which
Yeah.
is just, it was hysterical. Like that it literally said it was just targeted at
It was
you.
written directly at me. He's the
Yeah.
George Martin. George R. Martin said years ago, like, there's this annoying girl on the internet who's going to say dragons are horses, and I have to make it very clear that they're not horses.
Yeah.
And he said, wait till these people hear about the price of eggs. They're going to love this shit.
so so then we're introduced in the most ominous way possible to a character, another character who does not explain his presence. We just know that he's dressed well and covered in wine. And he's like passed out at a table. He gains consciousness just long enough to see Dunk point at him, say, "I dreamed of you, stay away from me," and then he basically passes back out. Very, very ominous for the random drunk character in the bar.
Just normal. That's normal shit. Does that not happen to you when you go out drinking?
the local drunk just gains enough cogency to make me feel like I'm about to die in some like
Yeah.
grisly way.
Exactly.
So he gets confronted with this, "I dreamed of you and you need to stay away from me." And eventually he finishes up his food and his beers. He specifically talks about the fact that he gets a handful of coppers back from the stag that he leaves.
Yeah.
So he ate very well for not that much money. And he heads out to the stables as he kind of thinks about well, one, this very strange interaction that he's had. Like, why did this person think that he knew me? And he has this sort of thought about knighthood as he walks out to the stables of like, this is what it means to be a knight. Like,
Yes.
good food, good beer, and like a stable boy taking care of my horses, and like I'm not a care in the world, basically.
I'm a real adult now. I'm 17.
Exactly. Yeah, good food and ale whenever I want it, and no one to clout me on the head. So so he is that's his vision of knighthood, is those three things. Not being beaten and
Better
eating
or
and
worse
drinking.
than Sansa Stark's vision of knighthood, you know?
Yeah,
I don't know.
right. Dunk, the stories aren't real. I need you to know that.
Yeah. And then he gets to but as he's going to the stable, he hears a noise. And he's like, ah, shit, all of my stuff is there, and those are my horses. Let me fast walk there in my drunken state.
Yep.
And he comes across the boy he had seen before, who he thinks is a stable boy, wearing all of like his, well, I guess his master's armor.
Yep.
And sitting on the war horse that they have.
Yeah.
They have 3 horses. They have like 2 like regular like normal horse, and then they have a war horse that's like, who I think his name is Thunder,
yeah.
Thunder,
who's only ridden, like he makes a point of saying he's only ridden in battle or in jousts, like, and that's it. But
there's
yeah,
this kid,
the
on
little
top of
kid
Thunder.
wearing all of Sir Arlan of Pennytree's stuff. And yeah, so he Dunk has like a very good natured sort of like approach to the, like he doesn't overreact. Like I was almost worried about, we talk about the 16-year-old reaction of like, hey, like that's my stuff. Like
get out of my car. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I think it's actually a very extraordinarily good characterization of him very early on. And George does a good job at this in terms of using character reactions to characterize. And I think it's a very effective way to characterize someone. So, Dunk is kind of just like, thinks it's funny. And it's not at all threatened because he doesn't need to be. He's like some kid. Like the kid didn't steal anything. He's sitting he's like clearly playing, like sitting on the horse. He like wants to be, he's pretending to be a knight or whatever.
Yeah.
The only one really in danger is this child on top of Thunder. Like the Thunder's not in danger, Dunk's not in danger, etc.
Right.
So he like takes it very well, and he's just kind of like, get down. Like you're gonna hurt yourself. Like you're not old enough for a license. Come on,
Yeah.
get out of there. And
Okay,
he's like,
quit. Yeah, quit joking around.
yeah, whatever.
Um, and they similarly have like this same sort of interaction where he is asking, like he ends up asking sort of about well, there's this really sort of funny interaction where Dunk tells him to close his mouth and then asks him a question, and
Yeah,
and this kid is like, how am I supposed to answer
he's so
if my mouth is
sassy.
closed? Yeah.
He's like, how am I gonna answer if my mouth is closed? And it's like, this is a rather sassy stable boy. Weird. Strange.
And then we get like Doug referencing his conversation with the innkeep because this kid asks to go to the tourney with
Mhm.
him. And and Doug is like, the innkeep had warned him of this, right?
Yes.
About her son, which is again different child,
Right.
which is really
Right.
funny. And but then Dunk asks about like, what might your mother think of this? And this kid is like, my mother is dead.
Mhm.
Um, which again is like, so Dunk has a thought of, wait, isn't the innkeep his mother? Which
Listen, he's got big muscles, not big brain. He's not Duncan the big brain. He's Duncan the big muscle. So
I just love the way that's written. Like that whole sequence is so funny. He was surprised. Wasn't the innkeep his mother?
yeah.
um and when they're actually talking about, they're actually talking about like people of significance, but but he doesn't know that. So it's just very funny. And then he basically is telling this guy like, well, he's telling this kid, yeah, I'm not I don't need a squire. Um
Because the kid's basically like, take me to Ashford. I can squire for you.
mhm,
And like you're a knight. I can squire for you. And he's like, no. And Duck thinks about it um, like the fact that the child has a good life here.
right,
He's like, he's being sympathetic. He could actually, if he's a knight, he could actually use a squire. Knights use squires,
for
but
sure.
Doug says he has a good life here at the inn, a better one than he'd have squiring for a hedge knight. Taking him would be no kindness.
Right.
You know, which is interesting given the fact that we know just from this section that Dunk himself was an orphan before his hedge knight took him on, before Sir
Yep.
Arlan took him on. So he's just learned that this child is apparently an orphan as well,
Mhm.
but and yet still thinks that's not the right thing. That's not the right thing to do. Him staying here is the better thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. It's like
Ye
an interesting little parallel.
yeah, and he basically flips the kid a copper penny and says he's leaving for Ashford alone, and then leaves
And the kid does not pick that penny up.
right.
Weird,
Yeah. Yeah.
because like most people would, most peasants would be taking that penny.
Yeah.
But the penny sits between his feet, and Dunk turns away and says like, "Oh, he'll scoop it up. Like once
Yep.
I'm gone, he'll scoop it up." I'm so sure about what's happening. I'm Dunk. I know what I'm
Yeah.
17 and I know everything.
Yeah, exactly. Even though he doesn't technically know whether he's 16 or 17.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
actually a really good point. He's like, so he doesn't know his exact
Yeah.
age. Oh, poor Dunk.
Poor Dunk.
What a lovely
So
befuddled knight.
so in thinking about this section, I mean, first off, we learn quite a bit about Dunk and
Mhm,
these other characters that we're introduced to, even though we're not fully introduced to them.
mhm,
Um, but one of the first questions that gets thrown out there a lot about this series of books is the question of like, did Arlen Knight
mhm,
Dunk before he died? And I think what's interesting in reading this particular section in isolation is his sort of assertion that he's a knight doesn't start until later. And this initial reaction, it kind of gives it away in a lot of ways. Like,
mhm.
it's not to say that it's not controversial. I don't think it is, because Dunk basically in his own internal monologue admits that he isn't a knight, because his first thought is not, well, I'm a knight now, like I have to go do knightly things or whatever.
Yep.
His first thought is like, what the hell am I gonna do?
His
Like,
first thought is, "I could go squire for someone else."
yeah.
His
No
first thought
knight.
isn't like, "Now I've been knighted and I must find a squire and proceed to Ashford." And his
Yeah.
thought is like, where do I go? Who do I work for? Like what like yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. I agree. I think it's like
So
that
he
would have
sort
been something he would have been thinking about during the burial if he'd been
right.
knighted.
Right. So he sort of it feels like he almost sort of like comes up with this plan, ex post facto of
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm like, maybe if I just say that I am, like it can be true. Um
It's almost like he's asking the question, what really is knighthood? And it's almost like it's a theme.
exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. But I do think it was really interesting because it's one of those things where in getting ready to read this, I was thinking like, oh, this is always one of the like controversial things about the story. And I'm like, I don't know that it's even a question. Um,
Yeah, because like you're right, because in that first section when he's doing the burial, he yeah, I mean, I think just the fact that so he thinks about being a squire in the sense that like the text
mhm,
is italicized and in the first person.
yeah,
He says, I could find another hedge knight in need of a squire to tend his animals and clean his mail.
yeah,
That is Dunk's thought. That's not like his perspective or like the narrative. That is literally his thought.
yeah,
And that is his first thought while he's thinking about like what to do next.
yeah,
And before that, he thinks about selling the horses.
right.
If he was a knight, if he had been knighted,
Hmm.
why would he even consider selling? Like he
Right.
needs,
He,
especially Thunder, but he needs the
right.
horses.
Yeah. They even, I think he even thinks about like, how as a hedge knight, like you don't have that much coin because your coin is always tied up in your weapons and armor and horses, right?
Right.
Like where you're
Mhm.
like, oh, I'm just not that liquid right now. Like,
Yeah.
um,
Just gotta invest in some of that Bitcoin and get some
yeah.
NFTs in here. It'll be great.
uh, so yeah, I thought that was an interesting thing where I think it's far more blunt. Um,
Mhm.
like the fact that Dunk is not a knight, which like um obviously as he proceeds to the inn and as he's talking to people, it's almost like he starts to refine that like,
Mhm.
yep, this is what I'm doing and I'm just like sticking with it. And as I get to Ashford, like I'll just keep kind of figuring it out. But
Mhm.
for now, people think I'm a knight. They're feeding me really well, like, and that is enough. Like that, like you said, like this is the life. This is what being a knight is like.
Yeah, and I think that gets to like a larger theme throughout like the A Song of Ice and Fire series, which is the concept of like the trappings of power. Like
Mhm,
what makes someone king? What makes
right?
someone a lord? What makes someone a knight? A lot of it is just like acting that way.
Yeah,
Just like, I have the war horse. I have the sword. I have the armor. Telling you I'm one. You have no way to fact check me here in Westeros.
yeah,
And, there's no LinkedIn page to check. You can't call my references.
yeah,
And just, putting know knowing how to present yourself to gain social clout is like a real skill. And we see characters in the main series, like Sansa Stark is a really good example,
mhm,
uh, doing that successfully. And Dunk is kind of like just starting out in trying to do that and
yeah,
like just trying to figure it out. And I love that concept that he's like, and I think it would kind of undermine it if he had actually been knighted.
sure,
You know what I mean?
right,
Like I think it would all that meaning and all that questioning of like what is knighthood would
mhm,
be absent if he had in fact been knighted by Sir Arlen.
sure,
You know, and also who cares if Sir Arlen technically said like you're a knight? That's not what knighthood is, as we'll learn through this text.
right, right.
Yeah.
And I mean, we could even, you even go so far as like the whole concept of knighthood in world and in our actual world, like the whole concept of
Mhm.
being knighted and knighthood and chivalry and all this stuff. They are constructs, right? Like
Mhm.
in world, the Andals basically bring the concept of knighthood like
Mhm.
to Westeros. It's not like a first men thing or a children of the forest thing or a
Mhm.
giant thing. It's all, it's not tied up in like ancient tradition or something like that. It's like an imported thing that like the Andals said is at the end. they, it's only people who follow, like, even Northern Knights are really not a thing because it's specifically tied to the Faith of the Seven and
Yep.
all of that. So it's all very, there's a lot of veneer on this stuff,
Mhm.
like both in our real world and and we'll talk more about sort of the concept. That'll be, I'm sure, a running theme of this
Yeah.
show.
I
But in
I
this case, it's like the whole idea of knighthood is pretty flimsy when you like peel back like the first layer of it, right?
I kind of liked how you said that the night concept of knighthood was imported into Westeros. Yeah, I'm gonna go big brain. Are you ready for like
I'm
big brain?
ready.
This is my English major coming out. Okay. Uh, George R. R. Martin's writing of fantasy in this universe is very often like legitimately to undermine your expectations, right? Like he wants you to think about like a fantasy story, but not in your like that has traditional elements, but is not traditionally happy, right? That's why Song of Ice and Fire is how it is.
Right.
The concept of knighthood, which is supposed to be this like brave warrior who saves people and does good. In the world of Westeros, that is very violent,
Yeah.
is kind of an imported concept. Like it's kind of like it's not a naturally occurring concept in Westeros because Westeros is not that fantasy story.
Sure.
Westeros is not about knights saving maidens
Hmm.
and pretty magic and stuff like that, and like princesses in towers to be saved, right?
Right.
It's turning all of those things on its head.
Yeah.
So actually, you made a really good point that knighthood is not something that is native to Westeros. It was brought
Yeah.
by the Andals, um, and it's trying to be imposed onto the ancient nature of this world that it doesn't fit with. I
Yeah.
think is another way for George to be playing with sort of turning those fantasy tropes
For
around
sure.
on us. Yeah,
For sure.
I
And
like.
and even like the fantasy stories exist in that universe too, right? Like
Mhm,
these tales of chivalry are also fake in
mhm.
his world. So
Yeah,
the fantasy stories are
the
fantasy to,
meta.
yeah, the fantasy stories are fantasy to the Westerosi also. So it's like, Simeon Star Eyes or whatever, like all these whatever. Um and Sir
And
Win of the Mirror Shield or whatever, like slaying
yeah,
dragons and stuff like that.
and here's Dunk trying to fulfill that,
Mhm.
right? Not thinking critically about like whether that's accurate or whatever. Here's like 16, 17-year-old Dunk being like that. I'm a
Yeah.
knight. Like that one. I'm
Yeah,
good. I'm the
ex
knight. Yeah,
exactly. He
and
also he also gets a little full of himself at the table where he's like he's telling the innkeep how he like, "I'm gonna be a champion,"
mhm.
or whatever, and, like, so he starts to even buy his own hype, like, even though he hasn't
He
even
hasn't
done
done
anything,
anything
like
yet.
yeah.
Oh, that's really funny. I
This
love
is
that.
just this is why tall men have to be stopped, like
Don't give him a podcast microphone because we'll never hear the end of it.
the confidence of tall men, like, this is really the issue. They just get
That's
away
really
with
funny.
murder. Um, we also get confronted with, like, obviously, we'll learn more about this particular, like, person as we
I don't
read.
remember who this is, so I'm
So
like in the dark right now about who this is. I forget.
so the dreams, though, we get, I mean, we're very early on and we've already got a drunk guy making like allusions to, dreams and prophecy and stuff, which obviously
Mhm,
George is it's another of George's favorite
mhm,
things to turn. But it's probably in this is like the oddest forum that we get presented with this prophecy, like this sort of stuff or magic or whatever. Like
mhm.
maybe it's just a drunk guy's ramblings, who knows? But the but we've never really been confronted with someone just like snapping up out of a drunken haze and being like, I dreamt of you. Like,
Like, "You, are you magic? Oh,
yeah,
no."
yeah.
And then stumbling
Um,
upstairs, yeah.
so obviously like dreams and prophecy and things are big in George's world, and this particular sort of approach to it is the first time that we get it from this sort of aspect where it's come out of left field, and the subject of the dream has no idea what the other person is talking about,
Mhm.
um
Yeah.
like Dunk doesn't think anything of it. Essentially, he's like, why did that guy think he knew me? Whereas most of the characters that we encounter in A Song of Ice and Fire are these nobles who are like, they said this cryptic thing. This is this, like, this means this and this
Mhm.
means this or whatever. Meanwhile, Dunk is like, why did that guy say he knew me?
Doug again misunderstands because the guy doesn't said he knew him. Doug said, "I dreamt of you."
Yeah.
And Dunk's like, "Why did he think he knew me? That's
Yeah.
not what he said, sweetie. That's not what he said." But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I think you make a really good point because to understand the implication of prophecy and dreaming, you have to have a certain level of education
Hmm.
to know, like in this universe, to know that that's a thing.
Yeah.
You know, like the main characters in Song of Ice and Fire knew that like there are Targaryens who are dreamers or whatever, right? Like that was like a
Hmm.
known fact about them. But that's like you need to know that fact to
Right.
understand. And if you're like 16 and you've been a squire for this one guy and all you really do is like ride around, like maybe you don't know that. Or
Yeah.
maybe you don't make that connection, you know?
Yeah.
So absolutely, I think to know things about like wargs, for example, like the Stark children know of the concept of
Hmm.
wargs. So when they encounter that kind of thing, like when Bran is taught about green seeing, he has like a reference point.
Right.
He's not like, can you imagine telling Dunk the Tall about green sea?
Like, you mean like when you look at stuff, it's greener than other people? Like, is that,
You see things that are greener than me?
yeah. Like, what color is that?
Yeah,
Like,
what color is that?
points to a tree. Like,
Someone's like, "I'm a green seer," and he's like, "It's so sad that you can only see the color green."
you only see green. What about this?
He just breaks out like a color wheel. He's like, "We put this
Yeah,
way."
he has colorblind testing now
Yeah.
for um so, but no, that I mean that is sort of it. And I think there's probably a level of sort of a, there's like a level of self-importance too, obviously, around the nobility, where it's like someone said something that might be a reference to me. It must be something that I have to fulfill and or
Mhm.
avoid, right? Like,
There's an ancient prophecy. It must be about me. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. Or
That's
that
that's
guy said, or that like old woman said X and now I'm gonna make it my whole personality.
yeah,
Or looking at you,
absolutely.
Cersei. Um so no, I think that was interesting, just his like sort of disinterest in, like, wow, that was really weird. And then now
Mhm.
again, it's a drunk guy who's like passed out at the bar. So it could just be as simple as like, yeah,
Or maybe
whatever.
the guy dreamed of someone really tall. Dunk has one distinctive feature. He's
That
very
is
tall.
true. That is true. He's
You know,
described as tall.
that's pretty much it. Or maybe it was a real prophetic dream. We don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll find out. Um, but yeah, I think also, I mean, that kind of comes to one of the themes we were talking about before we started recording, which is sort of the classism
Hmm.
within Westeros. And one of the interesting things about this text being that we're getting a very close point of view from someone who is not of nobility.
Yeah.
Like almost every character we get in the mains, almost every character is of
It's
nobility.
like
You have,
Davos is the only one
yeah,
who,
Davos is the American dream character. He rose up,
right.
he worked hard and rose up and
And
but by his own bootstraps got to the top. Yeah.
right. And by the time we are in Davos's POV, he's been noble technically for some time, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's not like we just, happened upon him right after he got his finger bones cut off or whatever.
Right.
Like,
Exactly.
and so yeah, Dunk, I would say, though, is like is really one of the few POVs
Mhm.
where we truly get sort of a, this is just a guy.
And for
um
that reason, though, I find him a lot more relatable and I feel much more protective of him.
for sure.
I could sit here and like dissect Cersei Lannister for like 4 hours and
Yeah.
like not feel any pain about it. And she has like, I find her quite sympathetic at certain points.
Oh, for sure.
But Dunk, I'm like, don't touch my tall boy.
Right.
Keep my tall boy safe. He just wants to have his lamb and his duck.
Yeah.
Please let
He just
my tall
wants the
boy be safe.
lamb and the duck.
Yes, like let him have his ale however much he wants. He
The
can
more
have
I'm thinking about that, was there a veggie on that plate, do you think, or was it just lamb
it.
and
I mean,
duck?
well, there was a with crust of herbs. I don't know what that means.
I mean, I think it just means
It's
that
just
they,
meat. Just a
on top
giant
of the
plate of
lamb,
just
yeah,
meat. Yeah.
yeah.
No veggies for Dunk. That's why he's so tall.
Which Which, like we said, I need the food. I need them to do like page accurate food in the show. That's really
Yes.
what I'm. Every single dish that is described in this and feast and everything has got to be in there.
Before
Um,
we transition into our
but
show
no,
wishes,
for sure.
I had one more thing I wanted that I noticed in this that I think
Yes,
ties to the larger series, which is the baldness of the child. Now,
yes,
this is not really a spoiler because it's really implied here, but this child is not a stable boy. This is an
yeah,
important child who has an important magical color hair.
yeah,
Can you guys guess what it is? Uh, who else? So what I find interesting about that is in this context, Dunk, even Dunk notices this kid is bald,
yeah,
and it even says in the text, like like in passing, but he describes the lad looked to be no more than 8 or 9, a pasty-faced, skinny thing. His bare feet caked in mud up to his ankle. His hair was the queerest thing about him. He had none, and
yeah.
he just moves on from there. But even Dunk notices.
Right.
Um, there's a main character in the main series who's bald,
Mhm.
who uh, just like is bald, and I feel like flies under the radar so hard, which is Varys.
Right.
And are you aware of the Varys Blackfire theories?
Oh yeah.
Okay,
Oh yeah.
so in very short form for our viewers, there's a theory that Varys is a Blackfire, which is an offshoot of the Targaryens,
Mhm.
and that's why he's so interested in like who is king in Westeros. Not because he's like interested in like the goodness of the what is it in the show? He like cares about
For
the people or
the
some
good of
shit.
the like the good of the realm, or yeah,
Yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
yeah, no, that's stupid. But the
There's
fact that
there are no characters who are actually like altruistic
none of them.
in this
Uh,
series. They don't exist except for
no,
Dunk.
Dunk, yeah, and I would argue Rhaenyra, but I would have a lot of people arguing with me about that one.
I
But
mean, it's at least uh more solid than the idea of Varys is an altruist.
yeah, yeah, no, definitely. And the thing about Varys that's so interesting is like the book because it didn't even occur to me for like several reads.
Mhm.
And then I like read that theory online and I was like, what? And I went back and reread the whole series to confirm. And I was like, oh shit, that has like real teeth to it because it's even, I believe it's noted in the main text that he shaves his head. Because it's
Yeah.
kind of implied like, oh, he's a eunuch, therefore he has no beard and
He
like
has
no
like
hair.
he like also got alopecia.
Right, and it's like, no, he would still have that
Yeah.
hair, he
Yeah.
just shaves it, you
Yeah.
know? And he would have to
Right.
if it was the wrong color,
Right.
and people would figure out who he was.
Yeah.
So, I really liked that bit here because obviously there's gonna be a reveal in this book as to who that child is,
Yep.
um, pretty soon,
Yeah.
and I do think that is partially practical in that for that scene to work, the child had to be bald.
Mhm.
But I do also think it's a not foreshadowing exactly, but I think it's a hint as to the main series to kind of like tap the reader on the skull and be like, "Hey,
Yeah.
you ever think about the fact that people can shave their heads to hide their hair color?
Right.
Hey, thoughts?"
Exactly.
So I did really like that that was present and that duck rolled past it so quickly too.
Yeah.
He's not the most noticing sort, our boy.
No. No, he's and that'll be a another running thing, which I think George often uses. We talk about in the main series, like there's a lot of readers, and I've like made TikToks about this and stuff about how people are very, very harsh about some of the POV characters being like quote unquote dumb or not politically savvy or like making
Mhm.
mistakes and all this stuff. And like I think they fundamentally forget at times that it is a book that a guy
Yeah.
is writing. And these aren't real people who are making real decisions. And he uses the characters who are believably not noticing this stuff or are believably assuming different things because
Yep.
it makes for a more interesting telling of the story when
And it
you
makes
get
the world
blindsided by this stuff. And so Dunk is like the perfect person to go through the story because there is going to be, like, as we talk about this, there's going to be all this stuff happening around him,
mhm,
and he's not necessarily picking up on it. He's picking up on like bits and pieces.
mhm.
But it wouldn't be fun if we were just, it's like the Blood Raven thing of like, if you just went through the story as Bloodraven, seeing all, it's like
Mhm.
it's not that interesting of a story, or at least it's not. It's like a history book instead of
Yeah,
a
it's not dramatic.
compelling dramatic
Yeah,
narrative. Exactly.
exactly. That's also why Fire and Blood should not be taken as straight history, my friends, because it's
Exactly.
not. It's from a point of view. And it's boring if you treat it as fact for fact, but it's really fun if you realize that it's severely biased.
Exactly.
Listen to my podcast as a Fire and Blood. Anyway.
And that's what I can't even imagine what the Dunkin' Egg story would be if a maester, as told by a maester.
Oh my god. We should do that at the end. We should do that at the end of each novella. Like what if Maester what is his name? Gerard what's the one that wrote Fire and Blood? I always forget which Maester wrote it.
uh
Gerardus? I forget. I get them
yeah,
confused.
yeah, yeah. It's
Whatever.
wait, hold on.
As if the Maester wrote Duncan Egg as a history.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Oh, that would be really good.
Maester Pycelle's retelling of the story of Duncan the Tall.
Yeah.
I Well, and I think in terms of, because we talked about some of the things, and we dipped it into a little bit of the class stuff, and
Mhm.
obviously the fact that Dunk is one of the few characters that we get in this. And I thought it was interesting how George really like hammers it home kind of right from the get-go, obviously because he gets kind of called poor
Mhm.
with the hempen belt, like
Yeah.
like, "Oh, you're a knight? Like, can't even afford a fucking belt?"
Yeah.
Or whatever, like, so he
Yeah,
gets,
you're a
like,
knight, sure, Jan, okay.
yeah, he gets, like, called poor, but then when the guy who dreams of him, like, wakes up or whatever, the first thing he notices is, like, how nice he's dressed, and Dunk actually has, like, sort of a snap reaction of he calls him "my lord," um,
Yeah, he
which
does.
which was really interesting to me because he says, like, the guy wakes up and says, "You stay away from me, do you hear? You stay well away." And Dunk stared at him uncertainly, "My lord?" Question mark. And literally all he's seen is his clothes. Like, he
I
has
mean, he
no
would
other
know.
indication.
He would that's actually, one bit of, like, social education he would need to know, which is how to identify, like, who's
Noble.
of the lord class, like, who's a
Right.
noble, yeah. Because, like, God forbid he was like, "My dude," like, that would be bad.
Yeah, and then you get 40 lashes or whatever, or like,
Right.
or in certain cases, I'm sure it's like, because hedge knights do have to, like, show up to court and get hired and stuff. It's
Mhm.
like you have to have some of these courtesies despite the fact that Dunk is like unrefined.
Right.
He like has the basic pleasantries because otherwise you're not going to get like hired for these, you know,
Mhm.
hired on by these like local lords and stuff. So, but I just found it interesting how it's like in this setting too, it's like everybody is wearing their class around
Mhm.
except
Yeah.
for, like, unless they're specifically trying not to. Like,
Yeah.
that's
Well, it
literally,
it tells you how important dress is, right? Like,
yeah,
and like, if you're trying and, like, the fact that Dunk is, like, again, like, still figuring out this knighthood thing and, like, trying
yeah,
to be like, "I'm a knight," and, like, your sword belt's a piece of rope, like,
yeah,
that absolutely, yeah.
yeah. So I thought that was yeah, I thought that was interesting. And then we get a little bit of a view into Dunk's sort of mentorship and the fact that he, we joke about Dunk being kind of like dumb and not really seeing like certain things. And he is sort of constantly reflecting on stuff that he was taught, right? Like and he's always sort of like going back to like his mentor and just saying like, "Oh, he said this, he sang," like, even he recalls like as he's burying him like the song he was singing about going to Ashford versus Goldtown. And so it's like
Mhm,
all of his all of what happens next like is sort of coming from this place of like what would he do, like he's kind of like almost acting the fake it till you make it is like he's just leaning completely on his
mhm,
like mentor and like and trying to find his way. And I think that's just one of the themes throughout that is it feels very endearing because Arlan of Pennytree, despite the fact that he's buried in the first scene of this book, is a character in this book.
mhm.
Um, and like has a say in like what happens, because Dunk is just constantly thinking about him and like the lessons that he learned and like what would he do, um which I think like in elevating Dunk and talking about this theme of knighthood and does it matter if he technically knighted him or whatever, if he armed him with the ability to go be a good knight, like
Right,
through his
exactly. Yeah.
mentorship.
Mhm.
So that was one of the things that struck me too, is just like even in the very, very first, whatever, like couple hundred words of this book, it's like
Mhm.
he's constantly thinking about Arlen and sort of what he would do and how to like be in
Mhm.
this new state.
And I think it'll be really interesting thinking about that theme going forward, watching how Dunk interacts with like his future squire and uh and sort of because that is somewhat a theme that is present in the main series. Um and I think it kind of ties to a larger concept of like what feudalism is,
Mhm.
because feudalism requires you to sort of the status not maintain the status you're in somewhat. Some people move around, amongst the nobility especially, but we do have characters who are think constantly about their parents, their siblings, their children, and I think it's quite a beautiful theme or a way to tell the story that Arlen is dead, and immediately
Yeah.
we never get to meet him, but like you're saying, like he is ever present,
Yeah.
and I like that kind of version of immortality, I guess, for lack of a better word, as opposed to like being in a tree, like
Sure.
maybe like the natural immortality that comes from passing on knowledge and skill
Yeah.
to someone. And really like saving Dunk, because Dunk just mentions briefly like he was an orphan before he was taken as a
Yeah.
squire, and like where would he be but
Yeah.
for that? He could be dead for all we know at this point.
Right.
So that I do really like that as a that's we should keep tabs on that
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
that goes forward. Yeah.
Well, they are about to in a few short months we're going to get all of this on screen.
We are. I'm
So if
scared.
there was anything, obviously the this sort of establishing area, there's not going to be any cool action sequence or like
Mhm.
anything like that that you're going to want to see. But is there anything from this that you particularly want to come through in the adaptation, that like came across in this section for you?
So I can tell you what I want. I can tell you what I think HBO is going to do. They're not the same thing. Um,
Spoiler alert.
what I would like is a shot for shot reproduction of this text
Yeah.
with the exact language. I actually really like the opening scene being
Mhm.
the grave digging and the like the funny interaction at the inn,
Yeah.
because it so thoroughly characterizes Dunk while doing very little.
Yeah.
Like even if you did that as screen time, you could do all of that in like 3.5 to 4 minutes of screen time
Yeah.
easily, easily. Like it wouldn't take long.
Right.
HBO is not going to do that. HBO is going to start at Ashford. If I was to guess,
Oh,
they're going to
interesting.
like start in the joust basically, or
And
start at the
then
tournament in some
do
fashion.
a bunch of like maybe do flashback and stuff like that to
Maybe, yeah, maybe do like some like a little flashback. They're not big into flashbacks,
right.
at least in these shows, but maybe do like a little bit of that. Um, but I would say that I would expect them to jump right into
Mm.
Ashford
Yeah.
and either dialogue, backstory, anything before that, or even like cutting scenes or whatever. But I wouldn't expect them to start at the
Yeah.
correct place to start, which is at the grave digging scene.
Yeah. I do think one thing that they will try to, and I know this is like in contradiction to what we just spoke about, but I do think that they are going to try to keep the knighting ambiguous.
Mm,
I think that's something that they're going to
that's
try
a
to
good
play
question.
a little bit more,
Mhm,
to say like, did he, didn't he, like, who knows,
mhm.
and then eventually sort of confronting like, does it fucking matter, like, probably not,
Yeah.
but I do think that they'll probably try to keep that ambiguous where it's like, is he a knight,
Mhm.
isn't he, and do you
Mhm.
believe him, like, as he continues to tell more and more people that, like, "Yeah, I'm a knight," like, I
Well, I
like
wonder if they could do that by, like, starting it at the tourney and having him be, like, kind of bumbling, you know? And
sure.
him being like, I'm totally a knight." And they'd be
Yeah.
like, where's your squire?" Like, what about this thing?" And then, like, kind of
Haven't gotten around to it.
yeah, like,
Yeah.
sort of, like, doing it that way. I actually wonder if, because here's the thing, I don't trust HBO, but I want to love HBO. I have to
Yeah,
complicate because I was burned very harshly by Game of Thrones, the bad show.
of course.
But then they came back with House of the Dragon, and I'm like, "All right, okay.
Yeah.
I'm open to being wrong about you being wrong."
Sure.
That's what I can give you. That's my open-mindedness. So, I wonder if one thing they might do, because in House of the Dragon, they made, like, a lot of firm choices that
Mhm.
were ambiguous in the text.
Yep.
The text being somewhat ambiguous about whether he's a knight or not, as we were talking
Mhm.
about somewhat. I wonder if they'll just make it clear off the bat that he was not knighted.
Yeah, maybe.
Like, if they'll just be like, he wasn't, and then make it clear from the jump that
Yeah.
this is a farce, basically.
Right. Yeah, it'll be
Oh,
it'll be interesting. I definitely am with you on the, like, I hope they given the fact that the source material is short,
so short. They're
like,
gonna make
you would
eight episodes as the first season, is what I read.
I think it's only 6.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense. Yeah, because
Yeah.
the novellas are little, so
Yeah. So I like I think in that you can squeeze in, like, a pretty faithful adaptation of the text, and I'm hoping that they try to keep it like, obviously, there's gonna be certain things that are different just because of um, the way that you tell a story visually versus how you do it in a book is different.
mhm, yeah.
But, like, I do think I think the biggest thing for me is that I want the way that they shoot it and the way that, like, the sets are built and all this different stuff, like, I have a very specific sort of, like, feeling and sort of this, like, a vibe
Yeah.
of, like, what it feels like, and I just hope they're
Amazing
able to
vibe,
I just want them to capture the vibe of, like, Duncan A like, I don't want
yeah.
them to try to do, like, dark brooding Game of Thrones, right? Like, I don't
Right.
want them to do Damon at Harrenhal. Like, I want it to be,
Mhm,
like, a little bit lighthearted and a little bit, like, I don't want them to try to be, like, overly dark. Like, it's still gonna be grim and realistic and, because
mhm.
there's stuff that happens at the tournament that is violent. It's a combat sport, like, that
Right,
is
yeah.
inherently dangerous, and so, like, that stuff will exist, and I think it hits harder when you're also in this sort of, like, whimsical setting
Mhm.
of, like, "Oh, everybody's just, like, here to have a good time," and then, like, stuff
Bad things
happens.
happen, yeah.
Yeah.
Things happen.
Yeah, yeah,
Uh, I'm gonna narrow my desire for what I wanna see on screen. I
sure.
want them to keep Dunk's kindness
Yeah.
intact. Because the scene, like, if they were to adapt the scene where the naked boy is on his horse,
Mhm.
could easily be adapted to screen as him being mad about that.
And, like, trying to rip him down and,
Right.
like, yeah,
And
yeah,
be like,
yeah.
"What are you doing? Get off my horse." Blah, blah,
Yeah,
blah.
yeah.
And it's like, that's not him. That's not
Yeah,
Dunk.
yeah, yeah,
So I think that they did a very good job in House of the Dragon, hitting on the characterization for the most part for most people.
for sure.
Um, so I'm going to cautiously trust that HBO will do the right thing. Do it,
Yeah,
HBO.
yeah.
Please. I
Well,
might be kicking myself a year from now, screaming on the internet about it, but I'm going to be optimistic.
well, the question now becomes, what will we be reading next time?
What will we be reading next time? Actually, we probably should have looked at this
We
beforehand. Look at
probably, but,
doing it
okay,
live.
so it'll start on 15,
Yeah, top of 15.
The Shadows of the Afternoon, and then I guess we would probably go to there's a nice
There's a paragraph break on 25
okay,
that
that
might work.
that could work, yeah. Yep, yep. I think that probably is best because then the section from 25 to, like, 30, like, 6 or something like that is, like, kind of all its own thing.
Yeah.
Um Yeah, yeah, yeah. So let's call it 25. It ends with so the luck is mine alone.
Mhm. Excellent.
Cool.
Yeah.
Um,
We did a great 20-minute episode there, Phil.
we knew what this was. Like we weren't
Fine.
gonna talk for now. Uh, maybe they'll be shorter, maybe they'll be longer. Who knows? Like I think we'll keep it open. But this has been the first episode of A Pot of the Seven
Yeah,
Kingdoms. We
yeah,
did we
we
did
did it.
that.
We are a true pod.
Yeah,
You know,
it exists
is
now.
Buck a true knight? I don't know, but we are a true pod.
Exactly.
We were potted by
Uh,
our you
our
can't ask
previous
our
podcast.
yeah, you can't ask our previous podcast because it's dead now, but we were definitely potted by our previous podcast.
So yeah, I guess we'll be back soon.
Yes,
Um,
anyone, if you have comments, ideas, thoughts, this is YouTube, so I believe you can leave comments down
yep.
below. And if you want to follow us elsewhere, I'm on TikTok as Block. I'm on YouTube as Barely Functional B. I'm on Blue Sky as Block. And I don't know, that's where I am. I'm not that interesting, but you can follow me if you want. And Phil, where can people follow you?
If you're watching this, you are on my YouTube, so keep an eye out for more stuff
Good
there.
job, you did it. You
Um,
found
yeah,
it.
and if you are finding this some other way somehow, then I I'm on
I know.
TikTok as well, at Damon Bachfire. And I make goofy videos about a lot of different stuff, but I talk about Islamic Vice and Fire a lot on there. And yeah, and then make goofy political crossovers that people seem to like.
Oh, they're
Um,
hilarious. Go follow everyone. Go follow him on TikTok because it's great.
but yeah, so we'll keep this going, and
Mhm.
thanks for listening along, and we will see you guys at Ashford next time.
Ooh, yes. All right. Bye, everybody.